Very much. So hi everyone, I'm Davies, founder of AgUnity. Now you'll have a smartphone in your pocket right now that's very much like this one. And that phone connects you with all the services that you need to live your life in a convenient way. But phones like yours and mine are pretty useless for a farmer somewhere like Ethiopia or Papua New Guinea because it was designed to meet our needs and not theirs. AgUnity takes this $50 phone and transforms it into a relevant tool for a farmer in a remote village. This very phone will enable the smallholder farmer to lift herself out of poverty. To achieve that, we couldn't just build a downloadable app. AgUnity actually transformed how the phone works to solve the many challenges that a simple downloadable app or a normal phone just can't, such as rethinking the user experience for people who've never owned any technology before in their lives, giving them a digital identity, dealing with the poor connectivity in remote regions, and then securely recording all their transactions on the blockchain for improved trust. Now, because this is a blockchain process, I want to elaborate on that. We use blockchain in the most simple way. It's like a transaction log for the system. So it means that when a farmer hands over her cocoa beans, she knows that no one can say that that transaction didn't happen. So this is Zara. She just lives on a couple of acres lands in Ethiopia and she grows food for her family and coffee beans for income. So she's part of a group of Ethiopian farmers where we've deployed AgUnities. But her problems, even for people from developing nations, will be really hard to appreciate because in a lot of places, those problems have been solved 100 years ago or more. Her crops often just go to waste due to poor supply chains and inefficiencies. She gets low prices for small amounts of goods, largely because the buyers have to pay her cash and taking all the risk. And then when she does get cash, and this is a problem that's particularly applicable to women, it's hard for her to avoid theft or save for things or buy simple things that she likes, like solar kits. And for a billion small-scale farmers like Zara here, everything is more difficult for her to imagine. The AgUnity platform enables her to increase her income, access things like secure banking, safe affordable credit, insurance and learning. But Zara's just one example, and this is a largely unaddressed market of half a billion smallholder farmers. But if you include their family and dependents and then others in the local food supply and local community, you're talking about roughly 40% of the world's population. 1 billion of those have no valid identity. 1.7 billion have no bank account. 2 billion of them have no access to financial services like insurance or microloans or things. And 3.1 billion of them really have no access to any technology that's designed for what they do. So while most of those farmers live on less than $100 a week, there's a lot of them. So they make up a really significant but largely invisible part of the world economy. They produce $2.1 trillion of the commodities like coffee and cocoa that sell into developed markets. They buy over $1 trillion of products and services from the developed countries. They're an untapped $1.5 trillion market for financial services. And they receive over $200 billion of foreign aid and support. And all those things are done in the most mind-bogglingly inefficient manner because they typically live in really remote, hard-to-access regions, and even the large NGOs have trouble reaching them and connecting and communicating with them efficiently. So while AgUnity mainly benefits the customers, our customers are really all those good organizations that are trying to work with and assist these developing world communities. And in the process, we save a whole lot of wasted money. So the challenges, we deal with a few types of customers. Our biggest one is like commodity buyers, so buyers of things like coffee. And the consumer demand for ethically sourced products like coffee, cocoa, cosmetic products is growing by the day. But commodity buyers really struggle to find reliable and consistent sources and they're willing to pay a premium if they can secure up their supply chain. So that's one thing we do. Banks, insurers, and other financial services, they struggle to reach the last mile communities efficiently or create a compelling offer. And because no one's got financial services and they tend to deal with cash, they're not a good market for it either. So it's a classic chicken and egg scenario. And there's little data about these farmers or proof of income or land ownership. So they struggle to get any financial services. And this is another thing. AgUnity allows these farmers to become bankable and insurable and get access to these services. And everyone knows delivering development aid is costly and efficient. And the reason is it's really hard to get to these remote regions. We work with a number of NGO programs, right from World Food Programme to USAID. And we give those programs a cheaper and more effective way of communicating with the farmers, surveying them, collecting, and also getting support into those communities. The smaller and more remote a farmer is, but there's sort of one challenge that we've not been able to address until now. The smaller and more remote farmer it is, the harder it is to reliably get a fair price for their crops. And one of the big challenges we've seen is most technologies for farmers targets the slightly larger and more advanced farmers, which gives them an advantage. But that increases the inequality. You have the farmers that have, the lucky ones that were able to go to school and might have quite a few acres. They tend to get the technology, they get the contracts with the buyers, and then they end up buying up all the produce from the smaller farmers who get a lower price. So what we're trying to do is level the playing fields with a solution that specifically addresses everyone from the very smallest low-income farmers and ultimately connects them to the consumer. And the big challenge that we've not been able to solve is when farmers do connect, they're still getting that very low price because supply chains have crossed them. Let's use coffee as an example. On a cup of coffee in somewhere like the US, a customer pays an average of $2.80, but a farmer only gets 7 cents of that $2.80, which is a couple of percent. And didn't used to always be that way. If we go back 30 years, the farmer was getting something much more in the range of 10 to 15%. So what's happened is, as we've started to pay more for these things in developed markets, the supply chains have taken up all that extra value and they've passed very little back to the farmer. But what if we could directly reward the farmer, either through the coffee company or the consumers themselves? A simple one-click 50-cent reward to the farmer means they've earned 8 times as much for the hard work that they did to produce that coffee. And suddenly they're getting something that's similar to other people in the supply chain. So it's made the whole system a whole lot more fair. And to do that, we've created a digital token. That token's called AgUnity, Agri-Utility Token. And what happens is ethically sourced coffee companies purchases the QR codes from us, which essentially reference a piece of AgUnity. Those go to the consumers. The consumer scans the QR code and immediately rewards the farmers. And there's a few options to the way they can do that. The farmer receives the AgUnity. They can use it to pay for items from the producer organisation like the cooperative or the buyer association. The producer organisation has to pay the subscription transaction fees and for the phones back to AgUnity. So we recycle this back to a company we call Aggregator in Singapore that resells them back to the coffee company. So we've created a beautiful little circle of flow here. In order to do this, we had to do a lot of groundwork. We had to set up a charitable foundation in Australia that we've completely rescinded all control of. We had to set an aggregated entity in Singapore that buys back the tokens and consolidates them into cards for the coffee companies. We already have a lot of farmer communities working with us, and AgUnity bridges the gap by acting as the mobile enabler at the farmer source. And the only reason that is possible is because AgUnity has already created, over the last 5 years, this digital ecosystem with thousands of farmers in multiple countries around the world. So we can create a token. Many cryptocurrency projects have tried to create a token for developing markets. Not a lot of them have been successful because they lack the way to deploy into those communities. And we had to build this really complicated ecosystem. I won't go through the details of how we've done that, but it's taken us years to get this exactly right, ensure that we're a utility token, and ensure that we can use this in many, many different countries, along with some really important trading partners. So AgUnity has a global presence. We've completed 7 projects. We've got another 8 on the go and a couple more starting in multiple countries around the world with some really big name partners. These are the organizations we're working with at the moment. Some of these will be participating in the token. I can't name them just yet, and I'll explain why in a minute. And in order to achieve that, we have an incredible and diverse team of over 50 people in 18 countries now, with deep experience in technology, farming, sustainable development and operations. And our executive team have decades of experience in their respective areas. And then we formed a board of very experienced board directors for this project, including the head of Australian Super, the developer of the biggest indoor solar greenhouse project in the world, and a board director that's been on many countries. So really, really credible story. The aggregate tokens, we're not creating them to generate money for AgUnity. In fact, we find any organization that does that to be a little bit suspect. The token supply is entirely going into circulation and being used to stimulate the coffee companies and ultimately get into the farmers' communities. And then we're releasing those in tranches. So the tranches sort of get slightly larger as they go along, and the tranches line up to a release of the aggregate token into our existing projects in different countries, starting with Ethiopia, following by Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and in each case we're introducing a new really big commercial partner to that. Now these are all private sales, so if you're interested in being involved in this, contact us privately. We don't sort of accept it from anyone. We're very, very selective in order to maintain the security of the system. And so thank you very much for the presentation, for taking the time to listen to me today, and hopefully you'll all look up AgUnity in aggregate and we can find a way to reward the farmers that really work so hard to produce those commodities that we consume every day. Thank you very much.
Okay, David, thanks a lot. So I'm already having my WhatsApp is buzzing, right, with questions. So first of all, congratulations for what you have achieved. I've been in touch with you since I think 2018. I've been seeing all the ups and downs beautifully, right? So a man on a mission, right? I'm missing already your beautiful hat. I always see you with your beautiful hat.
Just over on the shelf over there. I can put it on if you really want.
So now coming to the business end, there are few questions. The first question being that, do you see going forward also trying to monetize the data of the farmer, because you have already reached the last mile, right? So you have already connected the so-called quote unquote poor little farmer, right? And believe me, I am quoting myself also because I am a farmer. So, right, you have connected us with the markets, right? You have connected us with the end user of my product, right? But I also generate a lot of data, right? How do I farm? How much water I have used, right? Whether I'm doing it in a regenerative manner. Do you see going forward that all my good work, right, as a good farmer, you'll be able to get me some money in a monetization process?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit of what aggregate's intended to do. I mean, when the coffee when person scans the QR code, they see the farmer, they see the whole supply chain of that coffee right through, the distribution organization, right back to the cooperative and the time that it grew it. And I'm trying to say this without mentioning a really big company name that I can't mention until July the 1st, but there's a very big organization that does incredible work in those communities, and it will tell what's actually happened to that farmer. They've built the school, they've improved, the farmer's earning so much. And so that data is actually being monetized with aggregate to tell the consumer why you should buy, this brand of coffee instead of this one, because you can see exactly what that money is doing in the community, what the farmer's using it for. More to your point in the question, we have a bit of a philosophical issue on this one. I mean, as you mentioned in the introduction, I come from a market data industry, so I'm very familiar with Bloomberg and Reuters and the way they handle data. And I think that's a little bit more ethical than the Google, Facebook model, where they sort of take your data and then sell it to everyone. I think we should keep the farmers owning their own data. I think that's the right and ethical thing, because they wouldn't necessarily understand the value of their data if we took it off them and sold it. So I think we should be the conduit for farmers to sell their data and be able to get small amounts of reward for it. And that's another thing that we're hoping to do with AgUnity. Because we've got a digital token, if farmers are giving information on their crops and someone wants to buy that, we can pass them fractions of a cent in a reward, and that eventually adds up over time, and we're rewarding the farmers. And with the Bloomberg Reuters model, we just take a clip for sorting that out for the farmers. And I think that's the right way to do it. And I'm quite concerned when I see a company like, for example, Facebook going into rural communities, because we know what they're going to do, right?
That's very well articulated. And definitely, when I'm interacting with farmers, I love the way they are using WhatsApp, because they share their problems, challenges, pest infestation, prices which they find in the market, and talk to each other to find which marketplace is giving the right price. They share the fraud alerts that don't deal with this guy, he has defrauded me. So I see the beautiful example of WhatsApp, believe me, and we have trained thousands of farmers on ground, because in pandemic time they were not able to have access to market, right? And the WhatsApp video calls was the best way possible to conduct a trade.
We had a whole subsidiary company that dealt with keeping some of those farmers being able to move their produce in during the pandemic, because many of the places we work were locked down, and it hit the rural areas terribly bad. Many of them just weren't able to supply. So we've rolled that back in together now, but it was a huge initiative that drove a lot of growth within AgUnity, and importantly, kept a lot of people still earning money and a lot of food still moving.
Right. So, when I see WhatsApp, it gives me encouragement that, we have tools to deliver different value, maybe through a WhatsApp or those type of tools. But when I really see Facebook, right, in one of the area you work, Papua New Guinea, right, I saw a huge, literally huge, when you compare with the size of population Papua New Guinea is having, a farmer network of 10,000 farmers in a Facebook group. And that scared me a lot, because a lot of sensitive information, right? What has been grown, how it is being grown, right? What pest infestation is there. And we know that Facebook love to sell contextual data to maybe a pesticide manufacturer or someone who would see those opportunity. Now, my question to you is that what you are doing, right, as a company, when you compare to tech giants, whether it is Facebooks and IBMs of the world, do you see that going forward there would be consolidation in the blockchain agriculture marketplace, where these people, because you're talking about an $8 trillion economy in food and agriculture, right? The biggest farmer in America is Mr. Gates, right? So do you see you and me, people like us, right, will be facing challenge from these big tech players when they start concentrating on agriculture as well? What's your view on that?
Absolutely, and that's probably my biggest concern, that we know we're doing extremely good work in these markets, but I don't think other more commercial organisations coming into there would be as ethical in the way they deal with farmers, and that's a serious problem. On the other hand, we rely on organisations like World Food Programme and Fair Trade Organisation to get in there, and none of those companies is going to deal with a Facebook. So there's an interesting barrier to entry to reaching those farmers, that there's a lot of really good players in that community, and they're very hesitant with who they deal with, and we have to uphold ourselves to extremely high standards of data privacy and things like that in order to be able to work with those organizations. So I think there's a bit of a barrier entry there, and there's also a network effect. So once you reach a critical mass in a community, we've got communities where all the farmers have an AgUnity phone, and they're starting to transaction, and AgUnity phone. And once they start to use AgUnity within the community as well, that becomes even more sticky. Like what happened with M-Pesa in Kenya, right? No one can remove M-Pesa from Kenya because everyone just uses it. It's the standard. And so I think it's very important for organizations like yours and mine and anyone that is doing the good job to create that critical mass and a sort of a defendable wall, because without doubt, one day the monsters are coming, and I don't think that's going to be for the best interest of the world. I think we need to defend against that if what we really care about is the farmers, and we certainly do.
That's very excellently articulated, and I can vouch for that. You are among few people who is having the heart at the right place, right? So I believe people like you would be giving a good competition to some of the predators, and we have seen in agriculture since 1960, right? How many predators have come showing the moon to the farmers, and end of the day, the farmers still we are talking about 800 million of them living below the poverty line. David, my next question is around another area which I believe you touched upon, right? Where actually impact analysis or impact validation, right? That is something which is of utmost use for definitely organization like FAO or Fair Trade or GIZ or USAID or your own Australian Prisma, which is working in Indonesia, right? Now, how do you see that actually these typically developmental agencies or the typically non-government agencies which are working for upliftment of farmers and spending huge amount of millions of dollars, right, can leverage blockchain? And this is more a generic question, not specifically to your product or your solution. But overall, do you see that these people would be biting the bullet? Because not too many are still there are a lot of scaling up. I'm seeing since 2017, a lot of trials, but real scale up is still a little bit trials of that ahead of the time.
I think it's still coming. I think a big part of the revenue AgUnity makes is actually building the survey applications for exactly those companies you speak of, because one of their big problems is finding out whether what they're doing for the farmers really does mean the kids get to go to school more and all those. And we do a ton of that work, and we have a whole survey module we deploy for it. That doesn't really require blockchain. That's just data collection, and it's more a mobile technology thing, because normal mobile phones, you can't really do it in a structured way with something like a WhatsApp or WeChat. So they do need purpose-built solutions for that. And then the big problem is if you just build a solution for it and put something in the fam's farm, they're not really motivated to use it. So we double down on that by usually the farmers get some sort of incentive if they're filling out the surveys regularly, which they respond to incredibly well. If you give them a couple of % extra on their coffee beans every night, they'll tell you what the kids have eaten and things like that. So the survey applications actually work really well. And so that's the big challenge for NGOs and good organizations getting data out. Their problem, the other problem they have, and we're really recognizing this, is when they deploy funds into those communities, they don't really know where it goes. Now, without mentioning names, we've been in internal discussions with some ones that have expressed incredible concerns that so much of their money goes into an area and it just doesn't go where they expected it to go. And that's one of the beauties that digital currencies can solve, and what we're doing with AgUnity is that you can transfer money to a farmer that can only go to the school, or you can transfer it to the farmer and it becomes part of the producer organization's effort to build a new drying facility or something like that. So you can actually control where the currency goes. So I think that aspect of blockchain, the digital currencies, not just ours but others, can control the flow of funds into the communities. But for that to be useful, the farmers have to be able to use those tokens. We're working with a number of organizations that are dealing with carbon credits. Another massive issue, right? So many developing communities could be planting trees, earning carbon credits and getting a great income. But what does a farmer in Ethiopia do with a carbon credit? And one of the opportunities is to flip that to something like AgUnity at the aggregator level. Give them AgUnity which they can use already because the other farmers are using it, and then you've got a way of paying the farmers to plant trees. So solving that, sort of how you get money into the community and then what they do with it, I think that's the really big challenge for the development organization. It's a perfect blockchain use case.
That's a rarity, because the perfect blockchain use case has been elusive to a lot of us. We work in agriculture. Right, putting our heads and I believe if you see majority of those companies who have started their journey in early 2017-18 of adopting blockchain in agriculture, if you see their first business plan and you see what they are doing today, right, you'll scratch your head saying that actually doesn't look the same company at all. Right?
Tons of them. Yeah, I mean, we started a long time back as well, and but I think the thing is we come from a deep technology background. I mean, my technology here hails from very senior roles in Lehman. So we weren't using blockchain because it was a gimmicky new toy. And I think that's what a lot of people did. Like, let's use smart contracts for this. Let's use, let's elaborate. So many countries that did tokens when they didn't really need to. So there was a lot of overexcitement with blockchain. And I think now it's settled down and you've got the people that have got, proper architecture experience that know what to use, horses for courses, what to use where, what to use when. And this is where organizations like yourself, Deepak, are very important when people have got these initiatives, is to give guidance and experience as to what they should be using and when you should use blockchain and when you say, nah, there's a better technology.
I'll give you two anecdotal evidence. I was interacting with a very senior bureaucrat, right, in one of the governments. And for his water resources, he wanted some of the top minds in blockchain and he wanted to interact. So I got a message, I agreed, very senior person, you have no options, right? And then he said that, Deepak, I want to centralize all my water flow and I want to use blockchain. Right. So that's one. Secondly, a very senior professional, again from dairy industry. And he said that actually for my plastic polythene milk bags, I want to use NFT. I said, why NFT? We can give you a better solution. We'll find it out. I said, no. If people can sell digital art for millions of dollars, why can't I sell my milk using NFT? So unfortunately, as you rightly said, that the understanding, the architecture, the technical background, right? It's just not about putting the name blockchain, right? It needs a little bit the depth of that. Now that brings me to the last question, David. I'm not going to leave you without this last question. This is a little bit on you, right? What motivates David to think that blockchain is going to solve some of the key issues of agriculture, right? And I want a couple of minute pitch from you so that audience who are listening it, right, they start believing that blockchain can solve some of the inherent challenges of agriculture.
Yeah, so I often say this. Look, blockchain is not it's not cold fusion, right? It's a great technology. It has its place, and it has definite places in agriculture around traceability and food security and all the things that you said before. But it's not the all-solving thing, and that's not really, using blockchain is not what drives us. We use blockchain because it's suitable, in our case, for the transaction log and for the traceability. And they're the two things we use it for. And people should use it for what it's best at. What drives us is, after a long career in technology, when we started deploying this in the field and meeting the farmers and realizing you could really change people's lives in a big way. And whether that's 100 people or 1 million people, you could go to the grave, a poor man, having helped the lives of hundreds of people, help people lift themselves out of poverty. What would you prefer to tell your grandchildren about? That you earned a lot of money or that you helped thousands of people? That's what we're going to be remembered for at the end of the day. And that's what myself and all our team are motivated by. We're doing some very important work. We're a commercial entity because we want to scale big. We want this ultimately to be helping millions of people.
Awesome, David. So now, thanks again for participating in this event, and your presentation, your thoughts are refreshing. We look forward to having more Davids in this world if we really want to make agriculture more rewarding for the farmers and more safe food for those who consume food. Thanks a lot, David. It was a pleasure having you